welcome to this week's review on My Hero Academia Vigilantes, the manga series, and this week I'm reviewing the episode titled Taking an Astray, and we kick off this review, as always do with these reviews, by talking about the positives, and the headline positives, the big things I'm discussing over the course of this review. I feel that this episode does a great job developing Eraserhead's personal issues quite well. I find the time that he spends with his friends hanging around to be rather authentic for teenagers, and I enjoyed the humour in this particular episode. Yes, I do understand that sometimes I mispronounce a few things, but we move on. Now, by the looks of things, it turns out that I'm right, and that the present day Midnight, or at least present day relative to this series, does have the cat that features at the start of, well, this little storyline. I mean, it hasn't been officially confirmed yet, but, I mean, it is. I don't think we need official confirmation that the cat that she was petting towards the start of all of this was Sushi, so, you know, I was right. So there we go. And by the way, my discussion on the subtext of the stray cat and all that from the previous episode, where I talked about how the stray had a deeper meaning to it, there was a greater subtextual meaning to that from the previous episode. I was talking about that before I knew what this week's episode was called, so, you know, I'm not going to do what other channels are going to do, and, you know, when they cover series like this, or explicitly this series, where they'll read ahead and pretend to be insightful and like they're predicting the future because they're just that hecking smart, because, you know, they're that smart and that really matters to them, so they pretend that they predicted something when, you know, it was just them reading ahead. Like, I'm not that cynical nor that smart, so the fact that the whole stray cat analogy is going on this week and becomes a lot more developed, purely coincidental. I didn't realise that when I did last week's review. But anyway, this week we continue our venture into the personal history of Eraserhead, and by proxy, to a lesser extent, present Mike. We get a better understanding as to how Eraserhead found himself, or rather sees himself during this time period, and how he sees his quirk. And we see that present Mike was like a TikTok star in his youth, which makes him far worse than All for One. Jokes aside, I like how they were able to not just show, but also develop Eraserhead's perceived inadequacies regarding his quirk and his potential as a hero. Last week I mentioned how it wasn't exactly clear at the time when I was reading it as to whether or not it was a case that his quirk hadn't developed, or that he didn't really have a quirk, so to speak, at this time, or that it maybe wasn't as powerful as it could have been. Though, writing this review, I remembered that in the main canon, when Midori applied to become part of UA, that was the first year that we're starting to take students without quirks, so yeah, he was always going to have a quirk at this point in the story, particularly 2 years into his studies, so yeah, he was always going to have a quirk, so it was always a matter of just, why is he so down and out about it? And, well, it's the fact that he doesn't really see value in it, or rather that he sees as being incredibly limited. It is a quirk that, whilst we know the full extent of what it can do, we know how powerful it can be both in this particular series and the main series, for those of us who are that far ahead. The truth of the matter is, at this point in the story, as powerful as it is, I understand why he is so bummed out about it, because it is the fact that, as he says, he doesn't really see it as being useful in a fight. Yes, it, quote, erases a quirk, though in practice it's more like it pauses it, so this puts him in a situation where he's just nerfing whoever is fighting. So, if he's in a situation where he's fighting against someone who's like twice the size of him, then it's still going to be a bit of a brawl for him, and we see here that he still hasn't got used to fighting with his scarf or anything like that. He doesn't really know how to make use of it or get the most out of it, but hey, you've got to start somewhere. So for him, the reason why he's so bummed out about his quirk is the fact that it doesn't quite do everything he thinks it needs to, or as it should do. And I suppose it's also the fact that he sees it as being lesser than everyone else's quirks, because it isn't quite as flashy as everyone else's. It isn't shooting laser beams out your eyes or fire from your fingers. It's just something that happens passively. It's something that happens without really much of a visual cue. So, you know, he's in a class full of people that want to be superheroes and probably have more conventional superhero comic book character superpowers. and he doesn't have that. Oh, sure, he'd make a fantastic support hero, but, you know, in fairness, he still needs to know how to defend himself and others for in the event that when he's working as a sidekick, the person that he's working with, you know, goes down or something like that. Yeah, I understand why there's that much pressure on him at the moment, and I also understand why he doesn't really see himself as being useful. It's all understandable, it all makes sense. It is a little bit weird for us in the present day, but for the present day in the context of Vigilantes, but also the main series, that here we have this earlier version of Eraserhead that just generally bummed out about all of this, when we know, mate, seriously, give it a few years, this is going to be amazing, this is going to do some almighty shit right here, right, you understand it? But it's not so, again, it's not so much that he doesn't believe in the power, it's just that for him, it's like, I suppose it's like the build up to a joke. He's just missing the punchline. He lacks the physical ability to really take down whoever it is that he ends up using this quirk on. Now, in fairness, if you were to be critical, the fact he's building his entire fighting style around this scarf that he's struggling to get a hold of seems like a bit of a dead end for him. Like, we know how useful it comes in the future, but in the context of the here and now, you can't help but feel that one of his teachers is just thinking to themselves, you know, we should really have words with him. Like, maybe you should be better off with, like, a baton or some tomfers or a club or something. Or a stun gun to help you with this, because you're really not making progress here. But I suppose the students get a very good say in how all this ends up going, I suppose. But whatever, well, we know how it turns out, so I suppose we can't be too bummed out by all of this. But, you know, it is interesting to get a bit of insight from his teachers as to how, well, very average Eraserhead is at this point in his life as a student. Oh, sure, an average is still a pass, and an average at the school like UA probably puts him in a very high standard compared to others, but it is clear from what we can see especially that he's not hitting his potential. Like, just consider it for a moment. Like, if you were divorced from this and just thinking about, oh, imagine what certain characters were like when they were back at UA or back during their hero training or their hero education. What kind of things would they have got up to? How would they have been as students? You would have imagined that Eraserhead, regardless of his personality, would certainly be in the top percentage of his class. Maybe not academically, but given how skilled a combatant that he is and how useful his quirk is, you'd imagine that he's be right up there, but from the assessment that we get from his teachers, he really isn't. And to be fair, a lot of that does come down to this lack of self-confidence that he has at this point in his life. He has a quirk that isn't flashy or as immediately effective as others. Yes, it's useful, but like I say, it isn't eye-catching, and it is something that requires either him to be a good combatant or for someone else to be there to do the walloping for him. And in addition to that, you know, we have the additional issue that, as established in the prior episode and to varying degrees within this one, he's someone who doesn't want the attention. He wants to be invisible. He wants to just do his job and keep moving forward. He's doing this, I suppose, for very pure and very well-intentioned reasons, but at the end of the day, you are dealing with a character that just wants to be away. They want to be hidden from everything. They want to, I suppose the best analogy is that they want to be like Batman. They want to be this entity that comes out at night or wherever, deals with a bad guy and then just disappears. They don't do the press conferences, they don't do the silly songs and dances, they don't do the corporate sponsorship. They just come out, do this stuff and move on. They have no taste for it. It's something that makes them feel deeply uncomfortable. They'd rather just be doing their job, and understandable. That is something that we've had well established about his character over the course of this series thus far, as well as to varying degrees within the main series. This lack of self-confidence is something that is definitely holding him back. We'll see where all that goes as we go forward. This is an episode which goes great lengths to reinforce and underline his character and personality at this point in the story. Whilst this is still fundamentally the Eraserhead that we all know and love from the main series, these two characters, the modern day version and this version, are very different entities. Yes, the modern day Irasawa is still, well, something of a hermit and something of a recluse and not as extroverted, certainly not as present Mike, but hey, that'd take some bloody doing from even the most extroverted of people to be on par with him. But regardless, you compare the two characters, it's like night and day. This younger version of him is just so withdrawn and just so far into himself, just so wrapped up in his own traumas and self-doubt that it's like looking at a radically different person. Yet, as I'll discuss later on, it's all stuff that he's done in a way which does feel authentic, and it's something I did mention in the previous episode. His reluctance to be the hero, to be the guy, is done in a way which feels very authentic. It's not done for gags, it's not done in a, oh, I don't want people to look at me kind of way, which I suppose it could have been done in a different light, but here it does look from a genuine point of just personal anxiety, which I can respect. And all of this helps to, one, as I say, establish his character in the here and now, but it also has elements which foreshadow certain events in his later life, as we see with how he cares for the kitten. This, to a degree, does show that he has, and always has had, this softer side to him, this more paternal mind to him, this one that wants to help those are the stray, those that are seemingly too weak and too unable to look after themselves to one degree or another. We will see that later on in the story, in the main series with Eri, and possibly in the here and now with Crawler. This all goes once again back to the kitten, back to the stray. You know, we have this moment where his friends don't really know how to look after it properly. They keep bringing it into school with them. The cloud friend wants to just feed it some of his food, and you can't really do that with cats. Certainly not cats that age anywhere else, but still, Eraserhead has cat milk for him just on standby, and there he is, just cradling the little blighter rather tenderly. Like, even if outwardly he wants nothing to do with this cat, deep down within himself he wants to care for it. He wants to ensure that this little blighter has the level of protection that he always should have had. It shows that even despite all the personal fears and anxieties that he has within him, he still wants to be a hero. He still wants to be the one to save the day. He still wants to be the one to make life better for all those around him in whichever way that he can do. And that is something that does show the hero that he would end up becoming later on in his life. Like, let's not beat around the bush here. Whilst we are seeing an earlier, more anxious version of himself, deep down it's still the character that we go on to see. This is not someone who's so divorced from his future self that it feels like we're looking at a different character too much of it. And anything that's done in that regard, it feels like when seeing the character before the character development, if you know what I'm saying. Of course, the stuff with the cat is that he ends up getting adopted by midnight, but regardless, you get the idea as to what he's feeling, and the deeper context within the cat in this bit. Like, you know, it still shows that he still wants these things, these parts, these people that are around him to be better, even if he, at the moment, in this moment in his life, lacks the ability to make things better because of just how he's withdrawn into himself that he is. The scene that we see with Eraserhead and his friends is probably the most authentically teen behaviour that I've seen from possibly any characters around this age in this series, including the main one. I will admit that a lot of this comes down to vibes, and I'm very reluctant to lean on vibes when I'm doing reviews, but hey, these are done for casual sakes rather than for professional stakes. But still, you know, I will admit that it's a personal experience thing. Different people's life experiences will vary, but the fact that they have their lunch on the roof of one of the high school buildings when they really shouldn't, and that there really are better and safer places that they could be doing this, but are just doing it because they can, isn't too far away from the kind of stuff that I did in pretty much the same circumstances when I was around that age. Oh, sure, we weren't eating on rooftops, but it was stuff like eating lunch in stairwells in places of the high school building that we really shouldn't be in, or on fire escapes, or in the hall next to the cafeteria where we really shouldn't have doing. Yeah, sure, all of this is not the most authentically teen behaviour, and it's not quite as dumb as some of the stuff that I did back when I was a teenager, but hey, given the fact that the main cast in the main series don't quite act quite as the age should be as far as just the really dumb, stupid stuff that teenagers can do, hey, I've got to respect it. And I suppose this ends up going back to that problem that I keep talking about now and again about teens in TV series, even animated ones, acting more like mini adults, more so than just just goofy teenagers. Oh yeah, sure, some can be like mini adults, and to be fair, some teenagers are far more emotionally mature than some adults I know, but hey, some are prone to doing some royally stupid stuff just for the hell of it. Sometimes they do it as pranks, sometimes they do it just because an idea enters into their head, sometimes they think that there'll be no negative consequences whatsoever. But either way, we don't see those moments of rank stupidity either in the main series or this one, so you get something even is slightly like that is fair. Now, of course, in fairness to the cast for the main series, and to a certain degree with Eraserhead and his friends, they are students at a very prestigious high school, and the attitude to high school in Japan is vastly different to what it is in the UK and the rest of the world, because I think that high school is not compulsory in Japan. I think you have to pay to do it, but regardless, you know, I understand why certain kids in those scenarios wouldn't be quite as delinquent as maybe me and my friends were, but even still, you know, I can respect it. Sure, had this been more like the kind of stupid stuff that me and my friends would have done, it would have been just us getting packets of tomato sauce from the cafeteria and chucking them at the side of a building or something stupid like that, or I don't even know what without possibly saying something litigious, but still, regardless, it's just such a minor thing that, yes, it sounds like I'm making a lot of it, but it's just one of those small elements that there's no good reason for them to be up there apart from the fact that they are teenagers, and that's just stupid stuff that teenagers end up doing, which is what makes it feel authentic. Like, sure, again, they're not doing the kind of stuff that me and my friends would have done around that age, where we do something big, stupid, and thinking ourselves are clever, than spending the next couple of days worried shitless that we might have been caught on CCTV, and that any moment now we're going to get a bollocking, but regardless, you know? It's just those small elements that add something to the character and add something to the moment. To move on from that before we get into too far gone into this adventure into nostalgia, this all just goes into this. In addition to this, there are the moments in here where it does show Eraserhead's attitude, this reluctance, this introverted nature to himself, again in a way which is very authentic. This is something that is reflected when we see the montage of his studies and the stuff that he was doing with the other class. I would have liked to see a little bit more from that rather than just being in the form of montage, but still, it's fine. It works for what it was. It gets the message across, and we just see panel after panel of him looking uninterested and with a reluctant expression on his face, which carries very true to a lot of people that I knew about this age back then. These characters feel very authentic. They feel more like actual teenagers than teenagers from the main series. But still, regardless, beyond all of this, and to wrap up the positive section, I enjoyed the humour of this episode. Just the smaller jokes, like I mentioned, the stuff with just seeing the just general disinterested and reluctant look on Eraserhead's face. That stuff I enjoyed. The shenanigans with a little sushi was cute and fun. I'm not a fan of the gag about Teen Midnight's costume, but the insert panel of her like a year or two later going, yeah, turns out I can't be doing that, it's a bit too cutting edge, and it got banned, was a joke that I did like. Minor thing, but I still enjoyed it for what it was. With that said, let us get into the negatives, and keeping on a theme, I'm not a fan of the joke regarding Midnight's early costume. I know some people won't mind it, I know some people will be more annoyed at me for minding it, but no thank you. Really, no thank you. Not jokes like that. No, 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 and thrice no. That's probably more no's than RM3, but regardless, you get the idea. And whilst the gag about said costume not being legal for that long was fun, it's a level of the fan service that I'm really not keen on. Certainly not with characters that are, well, you know, in high school. No. Just no. No thank you. No whatsoever. And also, this is more pertinent to all of this, or rather to this episode, the content episode itself. I don't think that a sufficiently adequate job was done as regarding exploring Eraserhead's anxieties regarding his quirk. Yes, this will likely be explored more for the rest of the arc, but it still feels as though we're just still establishing things. We're still establishing the fact that he doesn't really see value in his quirk. He doesn't really see a use for it. He still thinks it's limited. And that's probably going to be the grand trajectory of this arc. I have no doubt about that. And yes, there is the point of, well, do we really want him saying every other episode, every other scene, "Oh, I don't see why my quirk is all that good." Oh, as in certain other series you get words to that effect. It does feel as though his anxieties with his quirk are something that only really is discussed for like a couple panels, and that's just about it. When it feels like at this point we should start rolling with this. Maybe we'll do that more in the next episodes, we'll soon see. But it does feel as though it's, well, at the very least, like a step before we should be. Like, it feels like we are missing a scene or a moment to just go, right, this has been established now, it's fine, we can move on. Maybe there's a show versus tell thing, maybe there should have been like a rejection letter from some hero, I don't know. But regardless, it does feel like there's just little something missing, like there's that little bit of spice missing that just isn't getting it there. But still, we've got like another 7 or 8 chapters in this particular storyline before we get to that point, so we'll soon see where that goes. Well, that said, let us get into the overview and say that I did enjoy this episode quite a lot. The midnight gag notwithstanding, I think this is an episode which really does, it has an authentic teen feel to it. I think it's doing a great job in establishing this earlier versions of the characters that we know and love. I think that more could still be done with Eraserhead, but it's still setting up for some fun stuff later on. Well, I say fun, it's probably going to be painfully depressing, but still, with all that said and done, it's time for Comment Corner! It's time for Comment Corner! Now we've got a comment from Big X1, and yes, this is another situation where I forgot to reply to that comment, but in my defence, it's less a matter of me forgetting to reply to it, and more the fact that YouTube, for whatever reason, has stopped sending me emails letting me know that someone's left a comment on my video. So if I ever miss anybody out, or I don't do it till, well, fairly late in the day, that's the reason why. For whatever reason, YouTube's being a pain in my backside. With all that said and done, however, let's get to the comment. And they say, it begins! This is my favourite art in Vigilantes. I hope you end up enjoying it. Thanks for your comment, and I've been enjoying what I've been reading thus far. As I've mentioned in prior videos, I am a week ahead of the reviews at the moment. So, thus far, so good. Don't want to give any spoilers, but so far, so good. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section down below. Let me know what you thought about this particular episode. Let me know what you think about where the Vigilantes is going at the moment. Thank you all for listening, thank you all for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye!
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!